On the afternoon of January 26, 1945, at 16:30, the defensive line of Houffalize village west of Bastogne in the Ardennes forest, Belgium, 2nd Lieutenant Audie Murphy of Company C, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, U.S. Army, huddled on the edge of a foxhole half collapsed by artillery fire. His left hand pressed tightly against a shrapnel wound on his right arm, blood soaking through the cuff of his khaki field uniform. In his right hand he gripped an M1 Garand rifle, the butt resting firmly in the crook of his shoulder, his gaze locked on a German armored column advancing 200 meters ahead. Just 10 minutes earlier, the Germans facing Company C's positions had launched a saturation artillery bombardment. Armor-piercing rounds fired flat from 88mm anti-aircraft guns sliced through the U.S. defensive line like the scythe of death. The company commander was directly hit in the first salvo, his body obliterated. Of the 3 platoon leaders, 2 were seriously wounded and 1 missing. From an original strength of 127 men, only 31 remained after 3 consecutive days of fierce fighting, including 12 too injured to fight. German Sturmgeschütz 3 assault guns rumbled over the U.S. trenches, the ear-splitting screech of tank treads crushing individual foxholes mingling with the screams of soldiers, the crackle of rifle fire, and the thunder of tank cannons, a brutal symphony of war. The few surviving soldiers had begun to retreat in disarray. Some threw away their weapons, others huddled in their bunkers, trembling uncontrollably. Company C's defensive line was on the verge of total collapse. Audie Murphy suddenly stood up from the foxhole. At just 1.65 meters tall and weighing less than 50 kilograms, he cut a diminutive figure among the U.S. infantrymen, who averaged 1.78 meters in height. He had been repeatedly rejected enlistment for failing to meet physical standards, and even after finally joining the Army, his comrades often mocked him, saying he couldn't even hold a rifle steady and was too weak to withstand a blow. No one had expected this seemingly fragile second lieutenant to become the last hope for the entire defensive line in this moment of life and death. He roared at the retreating soldiers, his voice hoarse with tension, yet carrying undeniable authority. "Halt! Get back to your positions. If we retreat, the supply lines behind us will be cut, and all friendly forces in Bastogne will be surrounded." But the fleeing soldiers paid no heed to his shouts. The German armored column had advanced to 150 meters, and the main guns of the Sturmgeschütz 3 assault guns had begun to swivel, their muzzle flashes glaring brightly against the overcast sky. Murphy knew that words alone could not hold the line. He had to take decisive action. He quickly scanned the battlefield, his eyes falling on an abandoned M10 tank destroyer 50 meters to the left of the position. Damaged by German artillery fire that morning, its engine disabled, the crew had been forced to abandon it. A single shell hole gaped in its left hull, but the turret still rotated freely, and its main gun ammunition supply was likely intact. Grimly setting his jaw, he ignored the communications officer's urgent warning. "Sir, it's too dangerous. You'll be cut to pieces without cover." He leaped out of the foxhole, hunched over, and darted through the gaps in the German fire. German MG-42 general-purpose machine guns opened fire on him, bullets kicking up clouds of dust at his feet, forming a dense wall of lead. He could even feel the wind of bullets whistling past his head. Rolling twice in quick succession, he took cover behind an oak tree split in half by a shell, caught his breath, then rose again and sprinted toward the M10 at full speed. As he neared the tank destroyer, a German Panzer IV tank suddenly turned its turret slowly toward him, its gun barrel aiming directly at his position. Murphy's pupils constricted. In the same instant, he threw himself forward, diving beneath the M10's hull. The Panzer IV's armor-piercing round screeched past the M10's turret, hitting a house behind it. The building collapsed instantly, showering him with flying debris and splinters. Using the smoke as cover, Murphy scrambled up onto the M10's turret and wrenched open the driver's hatch. The compartment was empty, filled only with the pungent stench of oil and gunpowder. He climbed into the turret and quickly checked the equipment status. The main gun was a 76.2mm M7 anti-tank gun, its breech clean and unjammed. The turret traversing mechanism functioned normally, with only minor hydraulic leaks that did not affect operation. The ammunition rack held 12 armor-piercing rounds and 8 high-explosive rounds. The coaxial machine gun still had 300 rounds remaining. Taking a deep breath, he gripped the turret controls with both hands and pressed his feet onto the gun controls, adjusting the barrel's aim. By this time, the German armored column had advanced to 100 meters. Leading the charge was a Sturmgeschütz 3 assault gun, followed by 2 Panzer IV tanks, with approximately a platoon of German infantry advancing behind them under tank cover, armed with MP-40 submachine guns. Without hesitation, Murphy trained his sights on the lead Sturmgeschütz 3. Through the gunner's sight, he locked onto the target, calculated the distance and wind speed, and adjusted the barrel elevation. His movements were smooth and precise. He pressed the fire button. The M7 anti-tank gun roared deafeningly, and the 76.2 millimeter armor-piercing round screamed toward its target, scoring a direct hit on the joint between the Sturmgeschütz 3's turret and hull, one of the weakest points on any armored vehicle. A thunderous explosion erupted. The Sturmgeschütz 3's turret was blown clean off, its crew killed instantly. The hull burst into flames, thick black smoke billowing upward and obscuring the view of the following German forces. This sudden counterattack brought the German advance to an abrupt halt, and the retreating U.S. soldiers stopped in their tracks, turning to stare at the suddenly resurrected M10 tank destroyer. Murphy gave the Germans no time to recover. Swiveling the turret rapidly, he aimed at a Panzer IV tank to the right. Its crew had already spotted the M10's threat and were frantically adjusting their own gun barrel to return fire. But relying on the M10's faster turret rotation speed, Murphy completed his aim first and pressed the fire button again. The armor-piercing round struck the Panzer IV's gun shield. Though it failed to penetrate, the immense impact jammed the tank's gun elevation mechanism, rendering it useless. Murphy immediately switched to a high-explosive round and fired at the Panzer IV's tracks. The tracks were blown apart, and the tank ground to a halt, transformed into a stationary target. The remaining Panzer IV, sensing imminent danger, began to reverse, attempting to pull back out of range. But Murphy would not let it escape. He adjusted his aim quickly and fired 2 consecutive armor-piercing rounds. The first missed, hitting the ground beside the tank, but the second struck the engine compartment dead center. The engine exploded, and the tank came to a stop. As the crew scrambled out of the hatches to escape, Murphy cut them down with a burst of fire from the coaxial machine gun. In just 5 minutes, using a single abandoned M10 tank destroyer, Murphy had destroyed 3 German armored vehicles, completely reversing the tide of the battle. But Murphy knew this was far from over. The German infantry still remained, and reinforcements were likely on the way. He had to seize this opportunity to rally his men and hold the line. He maneuvered the M10 slowly forward, the coaxial machine gun laying down continuous suppressive fire on the German infantry. Though the German MG-42s blazed fiercely in return, the M10's 7.62 millimeter coaxial machine gun dominated the fight with its higher rate of fire and greater stability. Shouting into the tank's radio, Murphy ordered, "All surviving members of Company C, return to your positions immediately. Use the terrain to establish defensive perimeters. I will provide fire support. I repeat, return to your positions at once." Faint, broken responses crackled over the radio. Several surviving soldiers began to drift back toward the positions, helping their wounded comrades to their feet, retrieving discarded weapons, and reoccupying the foxholes. Just then, the thunder of German artillery echoed from the right flank of the position. 2 105 millimeter high-explosive rounds landed near the M10, the massive shockwaves shaking the vehicle violently. Murphy's head slammed against the inside of the turret, his vision blurring momentarily. Shaking off the dizziness, he peered through the gunner's sight and spotted 2 German 105 millimeter field guns emplaced on a hill 1,000 meters to the right, shelling the U.S. positions relentlessly. These artillery pieces posed a far greater threat than the armored vehicles. If left unchecked, they would quickly reduce the newly stabilized defensive line to rubble. Murphy swung the turret toward the hilltop artillery position. At 1,000 meters, the M7 anti-tank gun exceeded its effective direct fire range. But Murphy had no other choice. He had to take the risk. Carefully calculating the distance, he adjusted the barrel elevation and aimed slightly above the gun shields of the artillery pieces, then fired a high-explosive round. The shell landed on an embankment beside the position, missing its target. Analyzing the impact point, Murphy adjusted his firing parameters and fired again. The second high-explosive round scored a direct hit on the carriage of one of the field guns, destroying it completely and killing its crew. The crew of the remaining guns scrambled to move their piece, but Murphy's third high-explosive round followed closely behind, hitting the ammunition crate at the rear of the gun. The crate detonated, obliterating the gun and turning the entire position into a sea of flames. With the German artillery neutralized, Murphy shifted his fire back to the German infantry. Under the cover of the M10's fire, the U.S. soldiers who had returned to their positions launched a counterattack. The sharp crack of M1 Garand rifles, the steady roar of BAR automatic rifles, and the deep thud of Browning heavy machine guns merged into a single overwhelming crescendo of fire. Trapped between the M10's frontal assault and the infantry's crossfire, the German infantry broke and fled, retreating in disarray. But Murphy did not let his guard down. He knew the Germans would not give up easily and would soon launch another attack. He continued to patrol the front lines in the M10, his eyes scanning every corner of the battlefield, his ears straining to pick up the faintest sounds of enemy movement. The wound on his right arm began bleeding again, the pain causing beads of sweat to form on his forehead. But he paid it no mind, simply wiping the sweat away with his sleeve and maintaining his vigilant watch. The communications officer climbed into the M10's turret and handed Murphy a canteen of water and a packet of hardtack biscuits. "Sir, you've been fighting for 2 hours straight. You need to eat something." Murphy took the canteen, drank 2 mouthfuls, and took a slow bite of the hardtack, his gaze never leaving the battlefield ahead. Just then, the distant rumble of tank treads echoed from the forest. Murphy tensed instantly, peering through the gunner's sight. At least 3 German tanks were massing in the woods, accompanied by approximately a company of infantry. Clearly, German reinforcements had arrived. Murphy knew that with just 1 M10 and fewer than 30 soldiers left, holding off a second German attack would be an almost impossible task. He had to call for reinforcements from battalion headquarters immediately. Grabbing the tank radio, he tuned it to the battalion frequency and shouted urgently, "This is Company C. We are under attack by German armored reinforcements at the Houffalize defensive line. Request immediate support. I repeat, request immediate support." Static crackled over the radio, followed by the voice of the battalion staff officer responding, "Company C, message received. Battalion is dispatching 1 platoon with 2 M4 Sherman tanks as reinforcements. ETA is 30 minutes. Hold the line at all costs." 30 minutes, a lifetime in combat. Murphy knew he had to hold out long enough for the reinforcements to arrive. He quickly issued orders to the soldiers around him. 2 machine gunners set up a heavy machine gun position immediately on the right flank to suppress German infantry. The rest of you dig foxholes and construct anti-tank trenches and prepare anti-tank grenades. Communications officer, maintain constant contact with battalion headquarters and report the reinforcements' position the moment they arrive. The soldiers sprang into action, transforming the once chaotic position into an organized defensive stronghold under Murphy's decisive leadership. Murphy positioned the M10 behind a ruined house, exposing only the turret to enemy fire, a tactic that minimized the vehicle's vulnerability while allowing it to engage targets freely. The German reinforcements launched their attack soon after, with 3 Panzer IV tanks leading the charge, infantry advancing in a fan formation on either side of the tanks toward the U.S. positions. German artillery opened fire again, shells raining down around the U.S. lines, sending clouds of dust and debris into the air. Murphy waited until the German tanks closed to 500 meters before striking. His first armor-piercing round scored a direct hit on the lead Panzer IV's turret, piercing it cleanly and killing all crew members inside. The German advance faltered once more. Murphy swung the turret rapidly toward the second Panzer IV, firing an armor-piercing round that struck its engine compartment, igniting a fierce blaze. The third Panzer IV, seeing the destruction of its companions, immediately retreated into the forest. Murphy did not pursue. Instead, he turned his fire on the German infantry. the coaxial machine gun cutting down scores of enemy soldiers and repelling the attack once again. Time ticked away relentlessly. Murphy had been fighting for over 3 hours, his body pushed to the brink of exhaustion. The wound on his right arm had reopened from the constant movement, the pain almost unbearable, but he refused to give in. Just as he felt his strength beginning to fade, the distant roar of tank engines and the cheers of U.S. soldiers echoed across the battlefield. The reinforcements had arrived. 2 M4 Sherman tanks, accompanied by a platoon of infantry, rolled onto the position. Seeing the arrival of U.S. reinforcements, the Germans realized further attacks would be futile and began a full retreat. Watching the reinforcements arrive, Murphy's taut nerves finally relaxed. Leaning back against the inside of the turret, he gasped for breath, his vision blurring before darkness overtook him. When Murphy regained consciousness, he found himself lying in a field hospital far behind the front lines. The doctor informed him that his right arm wound had been sutured, and he had suffered multiple bruises and concussions, but his life was not in danger. What he did not yet know was that his heroic stand at Houffalize had not only succeeded in holding the defensive line and halting the German breakthrough, but had also played a crucial role in stabilizing the local situation during the Battle of the Bulge. Even more incredibly, in the 4-hour-long battle, he had single-handedly operated the M10 tank destroyer, destroying 3 German tanks, 2 105mm field guns, killing at least 50 German soldiers and wounding countless others. For a man once mocked by his comrades for his small stature, it was nothing short of a miracle. Yet this fierce engagement was merely one chapter in Audie Murphy's extraordinary World War II career. This young man from humble beginnings, through his courage and unwavering resolve, wrote a legend on the battlefields of World War II, becoming one of the most decorated soldiers in U.S. military history. But behind this remarkable feat lay the brutal backdrop of the Battle of the Bulge, one of the bloodiest battles of the final stages of the European theater of World War II. A desperate struggle between U.S. and German forces in the Ardennes forest, a total confrontation of strategy, tactics, equipment, and sheer willpower. To truly understand Audie Murphy's miraculous victory, we must first return to December 1944 and examine the origins of the Battle of the Bulge, as well as the initial military situation faced by U.S. and German forces at the start of the campaign. At 5:30 a.m., on the morning of December 16, 1944, Army Group B under Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief of German Army Forces West, launched a surprise offensive codenamed Wacht am Rhein against U.S. forces in the Ardennes Forest region, straddling the borders of Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. This would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, the largest and bloodiest battle fought by U.S. forces in the European theater of World War II. By this time, the strategic situation for Nazi Germany was dire in the extreme. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Red Army had broken through Germany's outer defensive lines and was advancing rapidly toward Berlin. On the Western Front, Allied forces had landed in Normandy and pushed eastward, occupying most of France and approaching Germany's western border. Germany's industrial infrastructure lay in ruins under relentless Allied strategic bombing. Critical resources such as oil and steel were in critically short supply, and manpower losses far outstripped replacement rates. The offensive plan by von Rundstedt and Field Marshal Walter Model, commander of Army Group B, aimed to concentrate Germany's remaining armored elite to break through the thinly defended Allied lines in the Ardennes, drive north to capture the Belgian port of Antwerp, cut off Allied supply lines, split the Western Allied forces in two, force Britain and the United States to negotiate a separate peace, buy Germany much-needed breathing room, and potentially turn the tide of the war in the West. At 5:30 on December 16, 1944, the German artillery bombardment began precisely on schedule. 1,900 artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously, their shells raining down on U.S. defensive positions, command posts, communication stations, and supply depots. The U.S. communication network was crippled instantly, severing contact between units. After 90 minutes of relentless shelling, German armored and infantry forces launched their ground assault. Along the narrow roads of the Ardennes forest, German armored columns advanced like sharpened blades, piercing the weak points in the Allied lines. Caught completely off guard, many U.S. soldiers were roused from sleep by the sound of artillery fire, forced to fight a desperate, improvised battle. Under-equipped U.S. rookie divisions stood little chance against the onslaught of German armor, and their defensive lines crumbled quickly. The German 6th Panzer Army, the main striking force, advanced north toward Antwerp. The 5th Panzer Army pushed forward in the center, its objective the capture of Bastogne, and the 7th Army covered the southern flank, blocking potential U.S. reinforcements. The German offensive achieved stunning initial success. By December 20th, they had torn a gaping hole 80 kilometers wide and 40 kilometers deep in the U.S. lines, thus giving the battle its name, the Battle of the Bulge. The vanguard of the German 5th Panzer Army had reached the outskirts of Bastogne, a crucial transportation hub in the Ardennes. Control of Bastogne would allow the Germans to advance unimpeded toward Antwerp. Defending Bastogne was the U.S. 101st Airborne Division, a veteran unit fresh off the fighting in Normandy, resting and refitting when they received orders to rush to reinforce Bastogne immediately. Despite lacking heavy equipment and facing critical supply shortages, the 101st Airborne Division held firm through sheer force of will. Repeated German attacks failed to capture the town, and the two sides became locked in a bitter stalemate at Bastogne. As the Germans advanced rapidly through the Ardennes, the Allied High Command finally woke up to the crisis. General Dwight D. Eisenhower immediately adjusted his deployment, ordering Lieutenant General George S. Patton's Third Army to break off its current operations and march north from southern France to reinforce Bastogne. He also ordered the remaining forces of the U.S. First Army and Eighth Army to hold their flanking positions, preventing the Germans from expanding the Bulge further. Patton's Third Army executed a remarkable feat of mobility, reversing its direction of advance and covering over 100 kilometers in just 3 days under freezing weather and treacherous road conditions. On December 26th, they reached the outskirts of Bastogne, linking up with the 101st Airborne Division and lifting the German siege. Audie Murphy's unit, the 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, was part of the U.S. First Army, tasked with defending the western defensive line of Houffalize, west of Bastogne. This position was a critical node in the German plan to expand the Bulge and a key barrier blocking the German advance toward Antwerp, making it the site of intense, repeated fighting between the two sides. To understand the desperate situation facing Company C at Houffalize, it is essential to examine the overall condition of the 3rd Infantry Division. A seasoned veteran unit of the U.S. Army, the 3rd Infantry Division had fought in North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, and numerous other campaigns during World War II, boasting formidable combat effectiveness. However, after months of continuous fighting, the division had suffered heavy casualties and was severely depleted. When the Battle of the Bulge erupted in December 1944, the 3rd Infantry Division had just received large numbers of replacement troops to make up for its losses in Normandy. Though nominally at full strength, over 40% of its soldiers were inexperienced replacements with little to no combat experience. As the main regiment of the division, the 15th Infantry Regiment was responsible for defending an 8-kilometer-wide sector stretching from Houffalize to the western approaches of Bastogne. Each battalion was tasked with holding a frontage of over 2 kilometers, and Company C's sector at Houffalize was one of the primary targets of German armored attacks. After Patton's Third Army relieved Bastogne, the Allies launched a counter-offensive aimed at eliminating the German Bulge. The Germans, in turn, stubbornly defended their newly captured positions, launching constant, small-scale raids in an attempt to expand their gains. The two sides engaged in a brutal, attritional struggle in the freezing cold of the Ardennes forest, with temperatures plummeting to -20 degrees Celsius. Many soldiers were incapacitated by frostbite, which proved even more deadly than enemy artillery fire, compounded by crippling shortages of food and supplies. The 15th Infantry Regiment, to which Company C belonged, had held the Houffalize defensive line for 3 days and nights, enduring repeated German assaults and artillery bombardments. Their strength had dwindled from 127 men to just 31, and their supply lines had been cut multiple times by German forces. The surviving soldiers subsisted on meager rations of hardtack biscuits and melted snow, their physical and mental strength pushed to the breaking point. To make matters worse, the Germans had deployed elements of the elite 12th Panzer Division against Houffalize. Equipped with Panzer IV tanks, Sturmgeschütz 3 assault guns, and elite infantry armed with MG-42 machine guns and MP-40 submachine guns, the 12th Panzer Division was a formidable fighting force. At 16:20 on the afternoon of January 26, 1945, a German armored column from the 12th Panzer Division, supported by two 105mm field guns, launched a decisive assault on Company C's positions, the very attack that Audie Murphy faced in his foxhole. The German tactical plan was clear. First, use saturation artillery bombardment to destroy U.S. defensive fortifications and command structures. Then, breach the defensive line with an armored column. Finally, eliminate remaining resistance with infantry. The death of the company commander and the wounding or disappearance of the platoon leaders had left Company C without a chain of command, a critical factor in the soldiers' subsequent collapse and retreat. At that moment, the Houffalize defensive line epitomized the wider situation on the Western Front during the Battle of the Bulge. Though the Allies held overall numerical superiority, the Germans, through their elite armored forces and surprise offensive, were still capable of inflicting severe damage on Allied defensive positions in localized engagements. For their part, Allied soldiers relied on their unwavering determination, flexible tactics, and close coordination between units to repel repeated German attacks. Audie Murphy's emergence at this critical juncture filled the command vacuum left by Company C's decimated leadership. His precise marksmanship and decisive command not only stabilized Company C's defensive line, but also bought precious time for the defenses of neighboring units. But the fierce fighting was far from over. Though the German reinforcements had temporarily retreated, they would likely return with an even larger scale attack. Murphy and his men would have to continue holding the line, waiting for the launch of the Allies' full-scale counteroffensive. Next, we will return to the battlefield and provide a detailed minute-by-minute account of how Murphy, after taking command, turned the tide of the battle using nothing but a single abandoned M10 tank destroyer. At 16:32 on the afternoon of January 26, 1945, on the Houffalize defensive line, Audie Murphy made a decision in his foxhole that would change the course of the battle. Instead of continuing to try to rally the retreating soldiers, he would seize the abandoned M10 tank destroyer 50 meters to the left. This was no reckless act, but a calculated decision based on his acute assessment of the battlefield situation. With Company C's command structure shattered and morale collapsing, words alone were useless to rally the troops. The core of the German assault force was its armored column, against which conventional light infantry weapons were ineffective. Only heavy weapons could mount an effective counterattack, and the abandoned M10, though immobile due to engine damage, had an intact turret and main gun, making it an ideal fixed firing position to halt the German armored advance. The moment Murphy leaped out of the foxhole, German MG-42 machine gunners locked onto him. Nicknamed the Hitler's buzzsaw by Allied soldiers, the MG-42 boasted a terrifying rate of fire of 1,200 rounds per minute, capable of saturating a 3-meter-wide area with bullets. Murphy hunched low, zigzagging through the battlefield to evade the incoming fire. His boots crunched on the frozen ground, each step carefully avoiding scattered spent shell casings and loose rocks. Rolling forward twice in quick succession, he dove behind the trunk of an oak tree, roughly 30 centimeters in diameter. The tree trunk erupted with splinters as MG-42 bullets slammed into it, peppering his face with wood shavings that stung like needles. Leaning against the tree, Murphy caught his breath quickly, pressing his left hand against his bleeding right arm while gripping his M1911 pistol tightly in his right hand, his eyes fixed unwaveringly on the M10 tank destroyer, waiting for a lull in the enemy fire. 30 seconds later, the German machine gunners paused to change their ammunition belts, and the firing stopped momentarily. Seizing this fleeting opportunity, Murphy burst out from behind the oak tree and sprinted toward the M10 at full speed. But by this time, a gunner in one of the German Panzer IV tanks had spotted him, and the tank's turret began to turn slowly, its barrel emitting a high-pitched mechanical whine as it traversed. The Panzer IV's 75mm main gun, had an effective range of 1,500 meters, with a hit probability of over 90% at a distance of 100 meters. Once locked onto his target, Murphy's chances of survival would be virtually zero. Just as the gun barrel was about to aim directly at him, Murphy threw himself forward, diving beneath the M10's hull and curling his body into a tight ball. In the same instant, the Panzer IV's armor-piercing round screeched past the M10's turret, slamming into a stone house behind it. The building collapsed in a shower of debris, and a cloud of dust and rubble cascaded down, enveloping Murphy in a thick shroud of smoke. The smoke provided perfect cover. Murphy scrambled up onto the M10's turret and wrenched open the gunner's hatch, a pungent mixture of oil, gunpowder, and hot metal rushing into his nostrils. He climbed into the turret and immediately checked the fire control system, the heart of the M10's combat effectiveness. The M10's turret was hydraulically driven, capable of rotating a full 360 degrees in just 15 seconds, nearly a third faster than the German Panzer IV's 22-second traverse time, a critical advantage that would allow Murphy to gain the upper hand in subsequent firefights against German tanks. Murphy moved the turret controls quickly. The turret rotated smoothly without jamming. He tested the gun control pedals. The elevation and traverse mechanisms responded crisply, with only minor hydraulic leaks that would not affect short-term combat operations. Next, he inspected the weapon systems. The M10's primary armament was a 76.2mm M7 anti-tank gun, the core anti-tank weapon of the U.S. Army in the mid to late stages of World War II. Employing a semi-automatic loading mechanism, it could fire up to 10 rounds per minute and was equipped with two main types of ammunition: the M62 armor-piercing round and the M48 high-explosive round. Murphy opened the ammunition rack hatch. Inside lay 12 M62 armor-piercing rounds and 8 M48 high-explosive rounds, all in perfect condition, free from moisture or deformation. The secondary armament was a 7.62mm M1919A4 coaxial machine gun with 300 rounds remaining in the ammunition belt and a barrel at normal operating temperature, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Confirmed that the equipment was fully functional, Murphy took a deep breath, secured himself in the gunner's seat, and locked onto the target ahead through the M70G gunner's sight. Through the sight, Murphy pinpointed the joint between the Sturmgeschütz III's turret and hull, a universal weak point on all armored vehicles, with armor only 25mm thick, far thinner than the 80mm thick frontal armor. He rotated the traverse mechanism, aligning the crosshairs with the target, and pressed the ranging button, calculating the distance via the optical rangefinder. 100 meters with an error margin of plus or minus 2 meters. At this range, the M62 armor-piercing round, fired from the M7 anti-tank gun, could penetrate up to 120 millimeters of armor, more than enough to punch through the Sturmgeschütz III's vulnerable joint. Steadying his breath, Murphy pressed the firing pedal with his left foot. The M7 anti-tank gun roared deafeningly, its muzzle flash illuminating the smoke-shrouded battlefield for an instant. The 76.2mm armor-piercing round screamed toward its target, scoring a direct hit. A thunderous explosion erupted. The joint between the Sturmgeschütz III's turret and hull was torn apart instantly, the turret blown 3 meters into the air. The 4 crew members inside were killed instantly, and the ammunition rack detonated in a secondary explosion, sending flames shooting skyward. Thick black smoke billowed upward like a mushroom cloud, obscuring the view of the following German forces. This single, devastating blow not only destroyed the lead vehicle, but also threw the German assault formation into disarray. The gunner in the Panzer IV to the right, his view blocked by the smoke, was forced to stop and assess the situation. The Panzer IV to the left attempted to surge forward to fill the gap left by the destroyed Sturmgeschütz III, disrupting the German formation. Murphy wasted no time capitalizing on this confusion. Swiveling the turret rapidly toward the Panzer IV on the right, he heard the hydraulic system hiss softly inside the turret. 12 seconds later, the turret was fully aligned with its target. By this time, the gunner in the Panzer IV had just finished adjusting his own gun barrel, preparing to fire. But relying on the M10's faster turret traverse speed, Murphy completed his aim first and fired another M62 armor-piercing round. This time, the round struck the Panzer IV's gun shield, the thickest part of the tank's frontal armor. The Panzerwerfer's gun shield was 80 millimeters thick, and the M62 round failed to penetrate it completely. However, the immense impact force jammed the tank's gun elevation mechanism, locking the barrel at a 30-degree upward angle, rendering it unable to aim at targets on the ground. A tank without a functional gun is nothing but a target, Murphy muttered to himself. He immediately switched ammunition types, loading a M48 high-explosive round into the gun breech. High-explosive rounds were designed to destroy a tank's auxiliary systems and kill its crew, rather than penetrate its armor plating. He aimed the crosshairs at the left track of the Panzer IV, the core of the tank's mobility, with thin, unprotected armor. Pressing the firing pedal, the high-explosive round struck the track dead center. The track was blown apart instantly, metal track links flying in all directions. The Panzer IV ground to a halt, immobilized. As the crew scrambled to escape through the hatches, Murphy cut them down with a burst of fire from the coaxial machine gun, killing them all. Just then, the scream of incoming artillery shells echoed from the right flank of the position, followed by a thunderous explosion. Whoosh! Boom! Two 105mm high-explosive rounds landed near the M10, the massive shock waves shaking the vehicle violently. Murphy was thrown against the gun mount inside the turret, his forehead splitting open and blood trickling down his face. Shaking off the dizziness, he peered through the gunner's sight toward the right rear and spotted two German 105mm LEFH-18 field guns emplaced on a hill 1,000 meters away, their crews rushing to reload, preparing to unleash another salvo. These two artillery pieces posed a far greater threat than the armored vehicles. The LEFH-18 field gun had a maximum range of 10,250 meters and could fire high-explosive, armor-piercing, and smoke rounds. A single salvo from the two guns could blanket the entire Company C position. If left unchecked, the newly stabilized defensive line would be reduced to rubble in minutes. But destroying these guns would be an enormous challenge. The M7 anti-tank gun had an effective direct fire range of only 914 meters. At 1,000 meters, Murphy would have to use indirect curved fire to hit the target, a maneuver that demanded exceptional skill and experience from the gunner. Without hesitation, Murphy adjusted the barrel elevation, raising it to 25 degrees, and calculated the wind speed, approximately 5 meters per second, blowing from left to right, requiring him to adjust his aim 1.5 meters to the left to compensate. He positioned the crosshairs 1 meter above the gun shield of the left-hand field gun and loaded a M48 high-explosive round into the breech. High-explosive rounds had a large kill radius. Even a near miss could disable the gun or kill its crew via the force of the explosion alone. The first high-explosive round screamed into the air, tracing a high arc before landing 5 meters to the left of the artillery position on an embankment. The explosion sent a cloud of dust billowing upward. Observing the impact point through the gunner's sight, Murphy adjusted his firing parameters quickly, increasing the barrel elevation by 1 degree and shifting his aim 2 meters to the right. He fired a second time. This round scored a direct hit on the carriage of the left-hand field gun, flipping it over completely, its wheels flying into the air. The 3 crew members were killed instantly. Seeing their comrade's gun destroyed, the crew of the right-hand field gun scrambled to push their weapon to a new position. Murphy seized this fleeting opportunity, firing a third high-explosive round that struck the ammunition crate at the rear of the gun. The crate detonated in a massive explosion, destroying the gun completely and turning the entire position into a sea of flames. By 1710, the first German attack had been repelled completely. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of 3 destroyed armored vehicles, 2 demolished field guns, and 23 German soldier corpses. U.S. casualties were light, with only 2 additional soldiers wounded. But Murphy knew this was only the beginning. Contacting battalion headquarters via the tank radio, he reported the situation at the position. Company C defensive line temporarily stabilized, 3 German tanks and 2 field guns destroyed. Friendly casualties minimal. Request immediate resupply of ammunition and medical supplies. The response from battalion headquarters underscored the gravity of the situation. Ammunition and supplies are being dispatched. ETA 1 hour. Meanwhile, intelligence indicates that elements of the German 12th Panzer Division are massing near Houffalize, with a strength of approximately one company supported by 3 tanks. Expected time of next attack, 30 minutes. 30 minutes to prepare, every second counted. Murphy climbed out of the M10 immediately and began reorganizing the defensive position. First, he inspected the line for weaknesses. Company C's position was built around the houses and trenches of Houffalize village, with open farmland to the left, forest to the right, and village streets in the center. The most vulnerable point was the left flank, the open farmland, which offered no cover and was highly susceptible to armored attacks. Murphy ordered the soldiers to dig an anti-tank trench on the left flank, 1.5 meters deep and 2 meters wide, and piled abandoned logs and stones behind the trench to create makeshift anti-tank obstacles. At 1740, the Germans launched their second attack. This time, they altered their tactics, adopting a pincer movement strategy. The 3 Panzer IV tanks split into 2 groups, attacking the open farmland on the left and the forest on the right simultaneously, with infantry advancing behind the tanks. A small number of infantry were left in the center to pin down the U.S. defenders with small arms fire. The German plan was clear: avoid the strong frontal defenses of the U.S. position and break through the flanks to encircle Company C. But Murphy had anticipated this tactic and made thorough preparations to counter it. At 1820, the second German attack was repelled, with another 3 Panzer IV tanks destroyed and 31 German soldiers killed. U.S. casualties stood at 3, 1 killed, 2 wounded. After 2 consecutive fierce engagements, Murphy had held the position for nearly 2 hours. The wound on his right arm had reopened from the constant physical exertion, blood soaking through the bandages. Beads of sweat mixed with dust and blood streamed down his face, leaving dark streaks in their wake. The communications officer handed him a packet of hardtack biscuits and a canteen of warm water. Murphy took 2 bites of the hardtack and drank a few sips of water, his eyes never leaving the battlefield ahead. He knew the German attacks would not stop, and his physical strength and equipment were rapidly reaching their limits. The M10's main gun had only 5 armor-piercing rounds and 3 high-explosive rounds left. The coaxial machine gun had fewer than 100 rounds remaining, and the soldiers were physically exhausted. At 1850, a brief lull fell over the battlefield, a silence that only made Murphy more vigilant. Peering through the gunner's sight into the distant forest, he spotted signs of German troop movements and heard the faint rumble of tank treads. He immediately alerted all units via the walkie-talkie. "Stay alert. The Germans are likely preparing a third attack. Prioritize targeting enemy commanders and artillery units." As soon as the words left his mouth, tracer rounds from German artillery streaked across the sky. Another bombardment had begun. This time, the shelling was even more intense, shells raining down on Company C's position like hailstones, demolishing houses and filling trenches with debris. The soldiers could only huddle in their bunkers, enduring the relentless artillery fire. The bombardment lasted 15 minutes. At 19:05, the Germans launched their third and most ferocious attack of the day. This time, they committed all their remaining forces: 1 Panzer V Panther heavy tank, 2 Panzer IV tanks, approximately 50 infantrymen, and 1 81mm mortar for fire support. The appearance of the Panther tank changed the battlefield situation drastically. The Panther's frontal armor was 80 millimeters thick. The M10's 76.2mm armor-piercing rounds could only barely penetrate it at a distance of 100 meters. Worse still, the Panther's 75mm KWK-42 main gun boasted far superior armor-piercing capabilities compared to the Panzer IV's gun, capable of punching through the M10's armor with ease. The Panther tank led the charge, advancing to within 150 meters of the U.S. positions before firing an armor-piercing round at the M10's concealed position. The round struck the stone house behind which the M10 was hidden, reducing the building to rubble. Debris piled up around the M10's hull, impeding the turret's movement. Murphy immediately reversed the M10, backing it out of the debris field, and swiveled the turret toward the Panther tank's flank. The Panther's side armor was only 40 millimeters thick, its Achilles heel. He loaded an armor-piercing round quickly and pressed the firing pedal. The round struck the Panther's side armor dead center, and the tank ground to a halt, black smoke billowing from its engine compartment. But it did not explode. Murphy had failed to hit a critical component. The Panther's crew reacted quickly, swiveling their turret toward the M10. Murphy knew he would not get a second chance. He loaded another armor-piercing round and rotated the turret at maximum speed. Just as the Panther's gun barrel was about to align with the M10, Murphy fired his second round. This time, the armor-piercing round struck the Panther's ammunition rack. The rack detonated in a massive explosion, the turret blown clean off the hull, and the vehicle was engulfed in a towering inferno. With the Panther destroyed, Murphy turned his fire on the remaining two Panzer IV tanks. At the same time, the U.S. soldiers launched a desperate counterattack, hurling anti-tank grenades and Molotov cocktails at the German tanks. In the end, both Panzer IV tanks were destroyed, and the surviving German infantry were cut down by crossfire. At 1940, the third German attack was repelled completely. The battlefield now bore witness to the wreckage of 4 more destroyed tanks, 1 demolished mortar, and 47 additional German soldier corpses. U.S. casualties stood at 5, 2 killed, 3 wounded. After 3 hours and 10 minutes of continuous, intense fighting, Murphy was physically drained. The wound on his right arm had reopened from the constant movement, blood soaking through the bandages. Beads of sweat mixed with dust and blood streamed down his face, leaving dark streaks in their wake. The communications officer handed him a packet of hardtack biscuits and a canteen of warm water. Murphy took 2 bites of the hardtack and drank a few sips of water, his eyes never leaving the battlefield ahead. At 2010, the battalion reinforcements finally arrived. 1 platoon of infantry, 2 M4 Sherman tanks, and ample supplies of ammunition and medical equipment. The reinforcement commanders surveyed the battlefield, taking in the piles of destroyed German armor and corpses, and looked at Murphy with profound admiration. "Sir, you've pulled off a miracle. You held this line against all odds." Murphy did not relax his guard. He briefed the reinforcement commander on the battlefield situation in detail. The German 12th Panzer Division has been largely depleted in this sector, but scattered enemy remnants remain in the area. I recommend we clear the battlefield overnight and reinforce the defensive line to prevent a German surprise attack. Only then did the medics insist on evacuating him to a rear area hospital for treatment. As he was lifted onto the stretcher, Murphy glanced back at the defensive line he had held for over 3 hours. The M10 tank destroyer stood silent, its gun barrel still pointing toward the direction of the German attack, its hull pockmarked with bullet holes and shrapnel scars. Like a weary but unyielding sentinel guarding the hard-won line, the victory at the Houffalize defensive line on January 26, 1945, was not a stroke of luck but the perfect confluence of Audie Murphy's precise tactical judgment, flexible command, masterful marksmanship, the performance advantages of the M10 tank destroyer, German tactical errors, and attrition of German forces, all combining to turn the tide of the battle. From a tactical command perspective, Murphy's core strengths lay in his calm decision-making under extreme pressure and his practical, battlefield-adapted deployment logic, 2 factors that proved critical in stabilizing the collapsing defensive line. The seamless integration of marksmanship and equipment utilization formed the core combat capability that allowed Murphy to achieve victory against overwhelming odds. Murphy's exceptional shooting skills, honed from years of hunting in his youth, were on full display during the battle, manifesting in 3 key aspects. First, the precision of target selection. Murphy consistently prioritized attacking the vulnerable points of German armored vehicles, the turret hull joint, engine compartment, and tracks. These areas featured thinner armor, allowing him to achieve maximum damage with minimal ammunition expenditure. For example, when engaging the Sturmgeschütz III, he targeted the turret hull joint, 25mm armor, destroying the vehicle with a single armor-piercing round. When facing the Panzer IV, whose gun shield he could not penetrate, he switched tactics and targeted the tracks, immobilizing the tank. Second, mastery of shooting timing. Particularly in the duels with German tank gunners, Murphy leveraged his intimate knowledge of the M10's turret traverse speed to gain the upper hand repeatedly. The M10's hydraulically driven turret could rotate 360 degrees in just 15 seconds, compared to the 22 seconds required by the German Panzer IV. This 7-second advantage proved decisive, allowing Murphy to aim and fire first in multiple engagements, destroying enemy tanks before they could return fire. Third, precise adjustment of long-range fire beyond effective range. When engaging the German 105 mm field guns 1,000 meters away, beyond the M7 anti-tank gun's 914-meter effective direct fire range, Murphy calculated wind speed, adjusted barrel elevation, and used the impact point of his first shot to fine-tune his firing parameters, ultimately destroying both guns with two well-placed high-explosive rounds. This demonstrated exceptional skill in artillery operation. The performance advantages of the M10 tank destroyer provided a critical foundation for Murphy's tactical success. Nicknamed the Wolverine by U.S. troops, the M10 had significant flaws: thin frontal armor, only 30 millimeters thick, and a vulnerable engine. But in this defensive battle, its strengths were maximized. First, its firepower advantage. The 76.2 millimeter M7 anti-tank gun, firing M62 armor-piercing rounds, could penetrate up to 120 millimeters of armor at 100 meters, easily defeating the frontal armor of German Panzer IV tanks, 80 millimeters, and Sturmgeschütz 3 assault guns, 80 millimeters. Even against the formidable Panther heavy tank, the M7 gun could penetrate its 40 millimeter thick side armor. Second, the flexibility of its turret. The hydraulically driven turret's superior traverse speed allowed Murphy to engage multiple targets in quick succession, responding to threats from all directions. Additionally, the M10's M70G gunner's sight offered excellent optical ranging and targeting precision, ensuring accurate fire delivery. Notably, Murphy skillfully mitigated the M10's weaknesses. By positioning the vehicle behind houses and embankments, exposing only the turret, he compensated for its thin armor. By using it as a fixed firing position, he eliminated the disadvantage of its disabled engine. This represented a masterclass in maximizing strengths and minimizing weaknesses in equipment utilization. Beyond Murphy's outstanding command and tactical prowess, the German defeats stemmed from their own attrition, rigid tactics, and intelligence failures. In terms of manpower, while the German 12th Panzer Division was an elite unit, it had already suffered significant casualties during the early stages of the Battle of the Bulge advance. The force committed to the attack on Houffalize was only a reinforced company, approximately 120 men, supported by 6 tanks, 3 Panzer-Fries, 1 Panther, 2 reinforcing Panzer-Fries, and a small number of artillery pieces. This force was too small to achieve overwhelming superiority over the defending U.S. troops. In terms of tactics, the German offensive was marked by inflexibility, with 3 successive attacks failing to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. The first attack employed a linear triangle formation that collapsed after the lead vehicle was destroyed. The second pincer movement failed to anticipate the U.S. anti-tank trenches and supporting fire. And the third attack, despite deploying a Panther tank, failed to provide adequate flank protection, allowing Murphy to target the Panther's vulnerable side armor. Furthermore, the Germans suffered from critical intelligence failures. They failed to detect the abandoned M10 tank destroyer on the left flank of the U.S. position prior to the attack, and they completely underestimated Murphy's ability to take command and organize an effective counterattack, leaving their assaults repeatedly caught off guard. An analysis of casualties and combat results highlights the stark contrast in combat effectiveness between the two sides during this 3-hour, 10-minute battle. Company C began the engagement with 127 men. After the battle, only 23 remained, 5 killed, 9 wounded, representing a casualty rate of 81.9%. In return, they destroyed 6 German tanks, 3 Panzer IVs, 1 Panther, 2 reinforcing Panzer IVs, 2 field guns, 1 mortar, killed 70 German soldiers, and wounded 40 others, inflicting a casualty rate of 91.7% on the attacking German force. In terms of kill ratio, U.S. forces achieved a 1-to-14 ratio in personnel casualties and a 1-to-6 ratio in armor destruction, far exceeding the average ratio on the Western Front of World War II, approximately 1-to-1.2 between U.S. and German forces. This stark contrast is a testament to the effectiveness of Murphy's command and tactics. It is important to emphasize that this victory was not a solo achievement by Murphy. The coordination of the surviving soldiers and the timely arrival of reinforcements were equally crucial. Under Murphy's leadership, the surviving soldiers rallied quickly, constructing defensive fortifications, manning heavy machine guns, and throwing anti-tank grenades, forming a coordinated defensive system combining heavy equipment and light infantry. The arrival of the battalion reinforcements, 2 M4 Sherman tanks and 1 platoon of infantry, though occurring late in the battle, delivered the final blow to German offensive capabilities and secured the defensive line. Nevertheless, there is no denying that Murphy played a decisive role at the critical junctures of the battle, taking command when leadership was absent, seizing the M10 tank destroyer, destroying German armor and artillery, and organizing the defensive deployment. He was the undisputed architect of this miraculous victory. The victory at the Houffalize defensive line first brought Audie Murphy the highest military honors and a place in history. In February 1945, the U.S. Army awarded him the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States, in recognition of his extraordinary heroism during the Battle of the Bulge. The citation explicitly stated, "Second Lieutenant Murphy, in a situation where his unit was collapsing and command had broken down, single-handedly operated an abandoned tank destroyer, destroying 6 German tanks and 3 artillery pieces, killing over 70 German soldiers, and successfully holding a critical defensive line. He bought precious time for the arrival of reinforcements, displaying courage and command ability far beyond the ordinary." In addition to the Medal of Honor, Murphy was awarded a total of 33 decorations, including the Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart, making him one of the most decorated soldiers in U.S. military history and one of the most famous American combat heroes of World War II. Beyond transforming Murphy's personal destiny, this victory made him a powerful spiritual symbol for the U.S. military and the broader Allied forces. By the later stages of World War II, while the Allies held the overall strategic initiative, the prolonged, brutal fighting had taken a heavy toll on troop morale. Murphy's story of a small, seemingly fragile man defeating elite German armor was widely publicized by the U.S. military. Newspapers featured accounts of his exploits, the military produced a documentary about his heroism, and his image was even printed on recruitment posters, serving as a powerful morale booster for frontline troops and civilians on the home front alike. The reason Murphy's story resonated so deeply was not just his impressive combat record, but also his humble origins. Born into poverty, small in stature, repeatedly rejected for military service due to failing physical standards, yet rising through sheer determination and effort to become a combat hero. This underdog narrative struck a chord with millions, making him a central figure in Allied propaganda and morale-building efforts during World War II. In the post-war years, Murphy's story continued to spread and be remembered. In 1955, the film To Hell and Back was released, based on his wartime experiences. Murphy starred as himself in the film, which became one of the highest-grossing war movies of its time, introducing his heroic deeds to an even wider audience. Additionally, the U.S. military honored his legacy by naming multiple pieces of military equipment after him, including destroyers and tanks. Murphy himself became a national hero in post-war America, meeting with presidents on multiple occasions, participating in various charitable activities, and advocating for the rights of veterans, using his fame and influence to help countless other World War II veterans. More profoundly, Murphy's story transcended the military sphere, becoming a symbol of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things. Born into poverty, he endured a difficult childhood, was mocked by his comrades after enlisting in the Army, yet through unwavering resolve and courage, he forged an immortal legacy on the battlefield. His spirit of refusing to submit to fate and daring to surpass oneself has inspired countless people across generations. Whether for junior officers in the military or ordinary people in all walks of life, Murphy's story serves as a timeless reminder. Even in the darkest of times, as long as one remains calm, holds fast to their convictions, and adapts flexibly to changing circumstances, it is possible to turn the tide of adversity and achieve the impossible. Looking back at the 3-hour, 10-minute battle on the Houffalize defensive line on January 26, 1945, it was more than just a victory in a localized engagement. It was a microcosm of the Allied combat effectiveness and spirit in the later stages of World War II. Audie Murphy's actions demonstrated that the outcome of a battle is not determined solely by the size of the forces or the quantity of equipment deployed. The decision-making ability of junior commanders, the fighting spirit of soldiers, and the skillful utilization of equipment are equally critical factors in determining the course of a battle in war. Today, the smoke of the Ardennes forest has long since cleared, but Audie Murphy's heroic deeds and fighting spirit remain etched in the annals of military history and the collective memory of humanity, a timeless testament to the power of courage and resilience. Well, friends, that wraps up today's story about Audie Murphy's legendary stand during the Battle of the Bulge. Looking back at this fierce battle that took place nearly 80 years ago, it's hard not to be amazed by this young man, small in stature, yet unyielding in spirit. From a rejected recruit who failed to meet the physical standards to a combat hero who turned the tide of the battle single-handedly, Murphy's life embodies the profound truth that greatness is forged from ordinariness. In fact, on the battlefields of World War II, there were countless unsung heroes like Murphy. They may not have left behind brilliant combat records that went down in history, but they guarded the peace behind them with their unwavering perseverance. If you know other legendary battle cases from World War II, or want to delve deeper into the details of a certain World War II weapon, be sure to tell me in the comments section, and we'll continue our discussion in the next video. Don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any exciting war history content. Thank you all for watching till the end. Every like and comment is my greatest support. We'll see you next time. Bye.